You're now listening to the Adiel Gorel Show. Each episode, I'll bring you the latest news from my discussions with top health and wellness experts so that you can bring yourself into better health. Today, on the Adiel Gorel Show.
No idea. I would suspect that at a certain point you start to get replication, of course, but who knows else what is there? I mean, the reason why they pop is that they need to reproduce.
Hi, everyone. It's a joy to be here with you today. I'm exceptionally excited because I've been waiting for months to do this interview with Robert Rogers. Robert, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So the reason I'm saying that I've been excited and waiting for months is I am very much interested using and learning much more about the medicinal qualities of fungi and mushrooms, in general. I know you are one of the greatest experts, and I'm really excited because we're going to learn a lot here. So if you can tell us, Robert, how did you get started? How did it all come that you got into this field?
That's a great question. So about 50 years ago, I graduated with the botany degree and went further north. I'm in northern Canada, and realized I didn't know any of the plants in the forest, which is kind of embarrassing for a botanist. But so I really started my career as an herbalist, and about 20 years later, as I began a 20-year clinical practice, more and more of my clients were actually undergoing chemotherapy or radiation, and when we're looking for an adjunct for helping them to alleviate some of the symptoms they were suffering through chemo, and also, what would be good for them for longevity. And so I started working with Reishi, the Ganoderma, and Turkey Tail, and found great success, and was pleasantly surprised of how effective these two mushrooms were in helping keep people healthy through the regime.
And from that spun your entire deep dive into the field?
Pretty much. At that point, I began to do a little more research, and I found that a lot of mushrooms that had medicinal properties were within 100 kilometers of where I lived. And so I started going, and I always enjoyed picking mushrooms and photographing them. But also then I started writing a little monograph back in the turn of the century here, put out a small book in 2006, and then kept researching, kept really interested. And in 2011, a larger book called The Fungal Pharmacy was published, and that's still doing quite well. It's still a primer for some people who want to know more about medicinal mushrooms.
So, you mentioned reishi and turkey tail. Why don't we take them one at a time? Can you tell us about what has been shown and studied and what your experience has been as to the beneficial properties of reishi?
Well, that's a great question. This applies to all mushrooms. I would say reishi is the most well-studied, has conducted the most human clinical trials. And in short, there's a number of compounds that are alcohol soluble in that fruiting body, that, like the ganoderic acids, etc., that are highly anti-inflammatory, and they reduce inflammation in the body. And of course, that is what really is the weak link that is associated with inflammation, usually is our downfall. Reducing inflammation in your body is critically important for overall health. The water-soluble constituents, the beta-glucans, these very complex sugars, they gently nudge against lymphatic tissue, not directly, but indirectly in the intestine, and they actually modify, or I would say, they modify the immune system. What I mean by that is that when you modify um, the immune system, if the system is suboptimal, if it's not operating properly, the mushroom will actually bring it up to normal. So it's working protectively the way a good, healthy immune system does. All of your white blood cells and leukocytes and all of those that actually guard and prevent aberrant cells from actually becoming cancerous or turning nasty. The other side is, of course, is that they also, mushrooms will actually work with autoimmune conditions in the sense that they downregulate inflammatory process that's destroying your own tissue. So that's accurately would be called an immune modulation. And so reishi does that as well as they have some specifics for certain cancers, certain prostate cancer, certain, there's lots of double-blind placebo-controlled trials on reishi that show its efficacy in a number of conditions. Yeah.
So now that you said that this is the mushroom that's been studied most, and there are many double-blind placebo studies, which is the gold standard. Hopefully, this can placate people that I know who are, MDs, and I want to share a moment that was a little bit unpleasant for me. I've been using mushroom extracts, I'll talk about that a little bit later, for quite a while, and a very good friend of mine, one of my best friends, and MD, and a very good one at that, very, very sharp guy, came to my place exactly as I was putting the mushroom, extracts into a shot that I can use. And he said, well, what are you doing? And I explained, these are mushroom, extracts. And he made a gesture which was very, very jarring and unpleasant for me. Something to the effect of, oh, they work if you believe. It was so humiliating for a moment. And it was so frustrating. So, number one, what do we do about all these, MDs who just have not read the many double-blind placebo studies? How can we make them aware of it? Like, what can I get a book with all the studies and give it as a gift to my friend?
Yeah, you can. That's another nice segue. In fact, a couple of years ago, I'll just quickly show. I don't know if it'll show very well.
Shows very well.
So,
medicinal mushroom, the human clinical trials.
Right. And it covers the major 20 mushrooms and all of the human double-blind placebo-controlled trials that have been done to date, to 2020, with regards to their efficacy, not only for preventing and alleviating the symptoms associated with chemotherapy or radiation, but actually showing in many cases survival rates that are longer than they would be expected with the control group. So this is a book that should be in every oncology center. I've given a number of them away to different cancer clinics, and that would what you would do. You would actually say, here, have a read, because if you actually believe in that system, that is the gold standard, a double-blind placebo, blah blah, then you can't deny that they actually have efficacy and benefit. So the other side, if I could say this quickly, I was at a cocktail party about 30 years ago and sitting by a lawyer, and she said, do you know why medical doctors don't want to know about natural products? I said, yeah, I'd really like to know. And she said, there's a term in legalese called informed consent, that if you know about something that's effective, cost effective, and less side effects, and you don't share that with your patient or client, then you are remiss and you are breaking the law. If you don't know about them, then you don't know. So it's not that MDs choose to be deliberately ignorant, but they also are trained in a particular model at the schools where they're basically a little too cozy with big pharma. That's basically bottom line.
Makes a lot of sense. So why don't we go back to basics here? You talked about the fruiting body. So if you can describe the component of mushrooms in general.
Oh, sure. So the living organism is a mycelium, which is a mat of tissue that actually forms from spores to hyphae to mycelium. And then this mycelium in nature is found all through the ground. And basically, we would not have most trees on the planet without this connection of ecto or endomycorrhizal connection with root hairs of trees, where there's a bit of an exchange goes on. Not socialist, more capitalist. The tree says, I need water and nutrients. And the mycelium says, I need sugar to grow. And so there's this back and forth where they figure out who's going to give what so that they're all happy. And the other side is that mycelium also sends messages from tree to tree. For example, if there's a sickly tree in the forest, some of the quote mother trees will send some nutrients to that tree that's not doing well via this mycelium mat to help give it more nourishment, to bring it along and help keep it healthy. So it's an interrelationship that then the mycelium at certain point, whether they feel like they're stressed, they're end of their life, things like that, they feel like they want to reproduce. And that produces a fruiting body, which we call a mushroom. And the mushrooms are ones that we eat and use for medicine. They pop out of the ground or out of trees. And in factories, they kind of initiate that same idea using different substrates like wood chips or wheat or millet or anything, oats. And then at a certain point, by shocking that mycelium in the bag or in the limb of the tree with cold water or changes of CO2, all of a sudden the organism goes, whoa, we better reproduce. And then the fruiting bodies pop out. And that's the short of it. That's the easy way to explain it. Yeah.
So basically the ground, especially in forests, is pretty much covered in mycelium.
Totally. An interesting story. Many years ago, a farmer in Switzerland took a hectare of land and set it off. And then every year for 20 years, he collected the mushrooms that popped up. And every year they were different, suggesting that the organisms were living there and then they decided to fruit when they wanted to for optimal reproductive. That is, the fruiting body is just the way of containing the little spores that release into the air that actually create a new generation. So that's basically why there are fruiting bodies.
So the fruiting body is not only the little cap, it's also the stem.
The stipe, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, going back to the experiment in Switzerland with the hectare of land, informal looking every year at what was growing. Let's pretend for a second that the total number of mushrooms, that the mycelium on this hectare of land that could have grown is 20. I'm just making it up.
Yeah.
So in 20 years, in this case, it grew a different one every year. But what if we went for 30 years? What do you think would happen in year 21 or 22?
No idea. I would suspect that at a certain point you start to get replication, of course, but who knows else what is there? I mean, the reason why they pop is that they need to reproduce. And a great example is fire morels. Huge, vast territories of Canada and some of the US, forest fires consuming millions of acres of land. And after that burn, the next year, it's very common for collectors from Alaska all the way down the coast. They go into these areas, burn areas, and collect morels because they have a high price on the gourmet mushroom market. And why? Because the organism believes that it's running out of food. There is no more trees. There are no more trees. And so they need the fruit to reproduce. And that's one example of mushrooms being under stress, and then they reproduce. Otherwise, sometimes mushrooms take advantage of the fact that it's a good year of rain. And they'll go, well, this is a good year for us to fruit because we're healthy and everything's looking good. And these spores are going to land somewhere really optimal. So, for different reasons, they want to reproduce, and that's what they do.
So morel is more like food. They're not necessarily in the category of medicinal, right?
Yeah, it's not my top 100 medicinal. No, it's a choice. It's like many people's very favorite food, but it really doesn't have any very little proven medicinal value. Yeah.
So you mentioned at the very beginning that you used reishi and turkey tail. So we talked about reishi a little bit as a normalizer of the immune system, which was fascinating. What can you say about turkey tail?
Well, turkey tail also has that same capability of immune modulation. One thing that people should note is there's a really strong element in North America about the idea that mycelium or fruiting body, one or the other are better than the other. And so I want to just tell you this story where to set this straight. So the turkey tail, most of the research that has been done in Japan and China, PSK, Crestine in Japan and PSP in China, these are two products that are fermented mycelium products. That is, in huge vats, they introduce this mycelium, and it's in a fermentation process. It doesn't take that long to produce the product. And almost all the human clinical trials that are involved with this actually are this fermented mycelium product, not the fruiting body. Now, that's not to say the fruiting body, which is very commonly collected. I often go to British Columbia to collect the turkey tail because it's not in my province. And that makes a great dual extraction. That is an alcohol and water extraction if it's done properly. Most people don't know that turkey tail, you shouldn't heat the decoction, that is the boiling part, above about 78 degrees Celsius, or you actually destroy the health benefit. And so many people boil too vigorously. It's a good little tip for everybody. But here's the reality is that there is also a third product on the market, and that is what is known as myceliated grain. They just take grain like organic oats, and they introduce the mycelium to it, and it grows to a certain point, and then they market that. They dry it and market it. And that is not the same as the fermented mycelium product out of Japan, and it is not the same as the fruiting body. And very little studies have been done with human clinical trials with the myceliated grain. I'll give you one example of the product out of Japan, though, that really intrigued me and why I'm really interested. Over 400 people, double blind. One group, well, all of them had colorectal cancer. All had surgery, all resected, connected, and then they were sent home. The control group were sent home with placebo pills. The other group were sent home with 1 gram twice a day of turkey tail fermented mycelium product. And then they followed these people for the rest of their lives, the 200 of each group. And the 200 controls, they lived an average of about 4.6 years after the surgery. The group that were given turkey tail lived an average of 10.6 years.
Significant. Very,
yeah.
very significant.
And if you were an oncology patient, would you not like to know that information?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so oncology centers are remiss in not providing this information to their patients so they can use them as an adjunct therapy. Oncologists will always say to their clients, do not take any supplements while you're going through chemo. That is actually scientifically incorrect.
Fascinating, and fascinating that they survived more than twice the length of time than the control group. Now, does turkey tail have some additional attributes to reishi? Does it do things that are different as well?
Yeah, it tends to affect, it tends to benefit different types of cancers. For example, some of the hormone sensitive cancers, such as breast, ovarian, or prostate in male. And so, yes, they different studies tend to affect different particular forms of cancers in different parts of the body. Reishi is really powerful for liver problems as well. And turkey tail has its own set of convenience with regards to helping address not only cancers, but also can be useful for recently found very useful for type 2 diabetes, for helping increase the ability of the body to utilize sugar more effectively, allowing it into the cells, and also improving insulin production. So yeah, they're all different.
If we talk about the component of mushrooms, the mycelium, the fruiting body, if somebody wants to get an extract, should they get one that's made from the fruiting body, from the mycelium, the combination of the two? What would be the ideal? And maybe it varies by mushroom.
Yeah, very much so. Well, as I mentioned, most of the studies on turkey tail are from the fermented mycelium. Generally speaking, the mycelium that is produced in mushroom factories, that mycelium, after it starts to eat up all of the different kinds of grains, it starts to run out of food, and that's when it can be shocked and then produces the fruiting bodies. And most of the research has been done on fruiting bodies, and so you need to read very carefully. In some cases, both the mycelium and the fruiting body can be useful. For example, lion's mane, which is a mushroom we haven't talked about yet, but very valuable as well.
Let's talk about lion's mane. That was precisely what I was going to bring up exactly now. I heard that lion's mane has some benefits for brain health. Can you talk about it in general, about this mushroom?
Yeah, there's certainly not enough human clinical trials on this. I've been trying for over 4 years to get just like $250K for doing a human clinical trial in North America here, which is pretty small peanuts, really, and no luck. Alzheimer's Society doesn't seem interested, which is kind of shocking to me, due to the fact that lion's mane, both the mycelium and the fruiting body, contain compounds that increase brain neuron growth factor, meaning that it makes the neurons in the brain grow faster, more synapsing, more creation of connection for memory, both short and long term. Not too many human clinical trials have been done. There was one in 2019 that was, it showed some benefit. And earlier there was one for the symptoms associated with menopause that showed definite benefit. But I think we do need to do more studies. I think lion's mane shows great promise for helping increase brain acuity. And if anything, I would say that by and large, due to a number of factors, including food, pollution, et cetera, that brain health is suffering in North America. I wrote a book many years ago called Rejuvenate Your Brain Naturally, and I listed about 8 of the most important medicinal mushrooms that may be beneficial that way. And lion's mane, of course, came right up near the top. So I have promise and hope for it, for senile dementia and Alzheimer's. By the way, over 300 drugs have been developed in the last 10 to 12 years. Only one made it to phase 3 clinical trials, and all of them are an attempt uh, to take the beta amyloid plaquing that is associated with Alzheimer's and dissolve it. So, because the plaque is preventing the neurites from firing to each other. And so that would be a disaster, in my opinion, because I did a study a few years ago, and two scientists took the beta amyloid plaques from deceased patients, cut them open, and guess what they found? The herpes simplex virus, the cold sore virus that hitchhiked its way through leaky gut, through leaky brain. And immediately, as the brain was invaded by this virus that shouldn't even get there, the brain takes fat and just basically encapsulates the virus to prevent it making further damage. And so dissolving that plaque may be the worst thing we could do. That's just a theory of mine. I could be proven wrong in the future, but I really think trying to dissolve the plaquing is not the answer.
That's a fascinating thing. I never thought about the plaque in the brain as an encapsulation to hold the virus so it doesn't hurt, the rest of the brain. That is fascinating. But also, what's fascinating to me is, given that results are being shown, and I understand this is not a well-studied one, it fascinates me that you couldn't get $250,000 to fund the study. I mean, it looks like Alzheimer Society would be one that would fund you, or somebody else, but it looks like there isn't that great an interest in spending money on this. Is it because it's not a drug and money can't be made? I mean, what is going on?
Unfortunately, it comes down to the patenting of either a product or a technology, and that really shouldn't influence companies like the Alzheimer's Society, which is, quote, a nonprofit. It's there for the people, and also for governments that are looking out for the health and well-being of their citizens. I get it from a pharmaceutical perspective, but this is this is an epidemic. The numbers of people with Alzheimer's and dementia, we're not going to have enough facilities nor people to take care of all of these individuals coming in the next decade or so.
It's fascinating. So now, what about a mushroom? This name has been really around for a long time, at least for me to see. What about cordyceps? Can we compare the wild harvested Tibetan species with Cordyceps militaris that you can get in stores?
You can and you can't. The wild crafted, long harvested in Tibet, in fact, it's at one point was 26% of the gross domestic product of the country. And really, you can see when you go over there, a good friend of mine, Daniel Winkler, he takes people on tours over there to Tibet. And you'll see these little yurts that are all over the hillsides up at 10,000 feet. And all these brand new, 4x4 trucks, brand new off the lot. People who are all of a sudden getting money for picking these little mushrooms. It got to a point at one time where the harvesting of cordyceps was somewhat out of control and getting around $50,000 US per kilo in Hong Kong. That's not sustainable, or that's not available to the average person. So most of what was found in North America was an anamorph from a related species called CS4. And this was a myceliated product, as we were talking about. They would grow the mycelium, let it take over the substrate, and then just powder it and sell that. And it did contain some cordycepin and adenosine, and so therefore athletes were finding it quite useful, and it was really doing well for a long period of time. But it's not the true Tibetan mushroom. And it was a lot cheaper to produce, of course, especially in factories in China and in the US. By the way, one side of thing I wanted to talk about, a nanomorph related to cordyceps was found in the soil in Norway a number of years ago, and it led to the development of the molecule cyclosporin, which is a really useful drug for helping reject a graft host in people who have been given a organ transplant. And so, and very effective. But over the years, of course, that particular drug has a certain toxicity on the kidney. So two scientists thought, well, we should check this out. And they found that when they used the Tibetan cordyceps and gave that to a group of people with organ transplant, and they supplemented it with the with half the dosage of cyclosporin, they found that they get the same benefit with less kidney toxicity. So I consider that a really remarkable mushroom drug interaction. Having said that, the market, and I predicted this about 5 or 6 years ago at the Telluride Mushroom Festival, that Cordyceps militaris would be the next big wave, and it certainly is. And there's a lot of human clinical trials on this particular mushroom. It's so easy, I can grow it in my wash basin. Like you don't need insects, it grows really well. Within 40 days, you can have a crop of this remarkable mushroom that has the content of cordycepin and its related adenosine. These are two really related molecules that actually help to give it its reputation as an energy and sexual tonic. It really is a remarkable product and will continue to grow and grow. There's now a number of companies in North America growing it as an organic product, and I think the market will just continue to get bigger. Yeah.
So adenosine as in ATP?
Exactly. Very good. Yeah. The triphosphate, it actually is the way that our body, after expending energy, replaces itself. And so you can see how traditionally athletes would love how they have that it gives them that little extra boost. And so, yeah, it definitely has an energetic effect.
This is so fascinating. I wonder if some of the kings or emperors of all the time used this.
The Tibetan cordyceps, apparently, which grows on an larvae of a moth in the plateau there, they noticed the people who were the herdsmen of the yaks there noticed that in rutting season, the yaks would go and eat those cordyceps mushrooms, and that gave them that sexual tonic to service all the bulls would service all the cows in the area. And this information got back to the emperor, and he said, well, I want all of that because I've got a concubine and I got to keep up. And so that's how the reputation started. Yeah.
This is fascinating. So I want to move on and talk about maitake. I mean, what can you tell us about that mushroom?
Yeah, I love maitake. It's one of my great edible medicinals. As they say, all edible mushrooms are medicinal, but not all medicinal mushrooms are edible. So the maitake grows at the base of oaks. Usually, I've harvested a number of them in New York State and other areas. I like some big ones. They really get huge. I found one unusually under a maple in Peterborough, Ontario, that probably would have fed 100 people. It was that big. It was just like big and pretty exciting to find. Maitake has a couple of different fractions in it that are very useful. One of them is extremely beneficial for type 2 diabetes. And the other claim to fame is that it also has some powerful anti-cancer compounds. One of the things that's great about maitake is that it traditionally was only found in the wild, but people have now found a way to conveniently cultivate this in a factory setting And now you can find it at farmers markets, you can find it in grocery stores now. And it's a choice edible that is also extremely beneficial for your health.
Stay tuned for part 2 of this interview. Thank you for joining us today. I know you love what's coming next in part 2. Be sure to click the subscribe button for more videos.